It is a pleasure to welcome you all today. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We are honored to have Dr. Arvind Virmani, Honourable Member at the Niti Aayog, join us today for a distinguished public lecture and the launch of our fourth research project titled Vishwabandhu, India as a Provider of Global Public Service Goods, under the supervision of Professor Dr. Hindol Sengupta. I'll start by quickly introducing the Jindal India Institute. The Jindal India Institute is an independent and non-partisan strategic think tank dedicated to ideationally enabling India's rise in the world by building and disseminating a transnational, intellectually rigorous, evidence-based, multidisciplinary corpus of knowledge. JII aims to intellectually decolonize the study and depiction of India and spread global awareness about the country's extraordinary accomplishments and potential in the 21st century. Keeping this in mind, the Institute has 3 active research projects going on, covering various things, such as economic outreach and strategic diplomacy, India's efforts in forest conservation, and the interface of wisdom and Indian wisdom and science. This new project is going to highlight India's growing commitment to fostering international cooperation and development. Without further ado, I would like to invite Professor Dabirosridhar Patnaik, Registrar, OP Jindal Global University, to please give the introductory remarks and open the discussion.
Thank you so much, Kanak. Good afternoon, everyone. So I have great pleasure on behalf of the university to welcome Dr. Arvind Virmani, Honourable Member, Niti Aayog. We are so grateful to you, sir, for having taken out time. I know it's not easy, particularly on a rainy day, to travel all the way from Delhi to Sonipat, but we are glad that you could make it because all our students and faculty members are eagerly waiting to listen to your thoughts and ideas on a very pertinent topic entitled Vishwabandhu, India as a Provider of Global Public Goods. I'm also thankful to the Jindal India Institute for having convened this wonderful lecture this afternoon, and I'm grateful to my colleague Dr. Hindol and the Director General of the Jindal India Institute, Professor Sriram Chaulia, for having planned this lecture. And we are glad that we have amidst not only students representing various schools of the university, but also Professor Shailendra and Professor Abhirup Chowdhury. Professor Shailendra is a university distinguished professor, for those of you who are not aware, and Professor Abhirup is the executive dean of the Jindal School of Environment and Sustainability. And in a way, it is so very closely connected, the work of the school, to the theme of this particular lecture. And if we particularly look at the context setting for this afternoon, Dr. Virmani, I would like to present to you that the university, which was established in 2009 as a philanthropic initiative of our Chancellor and benefactor, Mr. Naveen Jindal, ever since in the last 15 years, we have established various schools with a focus on social sciences and humanities, starting with law, and then year on year we have added other schools traversing areas of international affairs, business, public policy, environment and sustainability. The list is long, but I'm going to keep it very short. And most recently, in the last few years, we had established the School of Public Health and Human Development, and preceding by establishment of that school, we had the School of Environment and Sustainability, the School of Languages and Literature. And in addition to the 12 schools that we have, we also have 4 university-wide research and capacity building institutes with a focus on higher education, behavioral sciences, and leadership and executive education. And the Jindal India Institute, which was established in January of this year, which is the 4th institute. So the core philosophy of our university is to focus on offering multidisciplinary education with a focus on research as well. And here we are this afternoon as we, in all earnest, try to focus on creating an India-centric approach and a method on varied matters affecting the Indian society and the larger society in and around India and even the world. This lecture on India as a provider of global public goods as part of the Viksit Bharat initiative also sits well within this context, because when we look at this particular topic, it's not that people are here only to know what are these global public goods and why are they called as global public goods, but largely we look at lectures like the one that we're organizing this afternoon, to offer a range of ideas to our students, because we do believe as a research intensive university, the learning would not happen within the confines of a classroom, but there are going to be so many other takeaways, which students and faculty members alike can gather from lectures such as these. So therefore, we believe that not only that this topic is going to offer some fundamental information pertaining to this area, but even some newer perspectives and even interpretation of what India can do as an emerging power, and even its economy which is on the ascendancy, and in what manner India can contribute to the knowledge society at large, forging both regional as well as international consensus for providing for global public goods. And there is no other person better than you to talk to all of us regarding this topic, because as an economist and even otherwise you have been focusing on these areas. So it's like something wherein we can get some primary information for our further research, learning, and even for writing. So we are so grateful to you that you have chosen this topic to address all of us this afternoon, Dr. Virmani, because even as a method, as a perspective, if we look at these areas, we have noticed a lot of literature coming on these areas from the Western world or even from other parts of Europe. But to my knowledge, and I stand to be corrected, there's not much which is written on global public goods. And this is one such opportunity wherein we can sort of, come up with a newer method that can give us territorial and even a geographical perspective, which can be India-centric and South Asian-centric, or even developing country-centric, that can offer, a basis for us to further learn and study. So that's where this lecture becomes very important, and it also augurs well with our mission as a research intensive university and as a globally ranked university, and most importantly as an institution of eminence, which the government of India gave us with this coveted recognition way back in 2020, and which you are aware, Dr. Virmani, it's a brainchild of the Honourable Prime Minister Modi. And we are so glad that we are one of the few IOEs, the acronym is Institutions of Eminence, and we are one of the few IOEs in the country, but we also do have a commitment to contribute to research and learning, and this so beautifully sits even with that particular objective. So I cannot but thank you on my own behalf and behalf of the university for you having accepted our invitation to be here with us and address all of us. And we also sincerely hope that our students and faculty members will get an opportunity to associate with Niti Aayog in one or the other capacity to enhance their learning and to contribute to the mission goals of Niti Aayog as well. So on that particular note, I welcome you to the campus once again, and we are so grateful to you for your time.
Thank you for your remarks, sir. Now I request Professor Patnaik to please felicitate our guest. Before we delve deeper into the discussion, I request Professor Hindol Sengupta to please introduce the topic and the guest today.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Patnaik, for a wonderful summary of all the wonderful things that we at JGU do. I'm particularly delighted that Dr. Virmani has come today. The first time I met Dr. Virmani, I was a young journalist working for Bloomberg. He was chief economic advisor at the Ministry of Finance. I remember he had just written a book called The Sudoku of India's Growth. if I remember correctly. And I remember meeting him in his office. It's been a long journey of knowing him for more than 15 years now. And I've always looked up to him as somebody who had such insightful comments about India's growth trajectory and India's future, of course, including in his time at international institutions and so on and so forth. Also, I must add, Dr. Virmani, in a sense, has reinvented himself with very astute comments on Twitter, now known as X, on India's growth. You know, many scholars of his repute don't really engage on social media, but he does, for which we are thankful. This project is particularly close to my heart, our heart. I really think India, as a global provider of public goods, is really coming of age. The vaccine diplomacy showed us that. And in many, many ways, India is now a provider rather than a recipient. And I think this is as much a material shift as it is a philosophical mindset shift. And we want to explore all these dimensions in this project. After Dr. Virmani's lecture, this project will be opened up. I invite students to apply to join this project so that we can do a great job of it. And I really think this project would gain a lot of attention. Thank you very much, all the students, for being here, the professors. Thank you. It's been a rainy day, but thanks for your time. Over to Kanak to take these proceedings forward.
Thank you, sir. Now I request Dr. Arvind Virmani to please proceed with his lecture.
Mr. Patnaik, Hindol, professors and students. I always look forward to speaking to universities. In fact, over the last 6 months, I've talked in 6 different colleges of Delhi, and it's really always a pleasure. But I'm sorry, I'll have to speak a little slowly because I've got a little problem here. Okay, so basically, I should start. I just want to start by saying that most of these things are, which I'm going to talk about, are in this paper, which can be downloaded from the website of the Niti Aayog. But as Hindol is starting his course, so what I basically do is give a big picture, India in the world, and what is going on, how it relates to what is happening in India. The main lecture is on that, but I want to start by directly addressing the issues which are of interest today. Let me see, how does this work? Go forward. ये दिखाना कोई है यहाँ पे, एक मिनट, किस साइड से होगा? Right. Yeah? Or I guess I can say next. All right. So I'm going to start by talking about 2 public goods, which I have some personal interaction knowledge about. I'm sure you will learn about public goods and externalities, but let me, being a bit of an academic myself, I can never restrain myself from doing a little academics. But basically, the idea of externalities is that if one person does something, the benefits of that go to a wider set of people. So there is an externality in the benefits which cannot be garnered by the person who does it. So there's a role for government because government wants the whole society to benefit, and in this case, not just Indian society, but outside. So I have picked 2 examples. One of them is drugs and pharma. And I'm going to give, my perspective is always economics, because I apply economics to international affairs and everything else. But here we are not going to speak about that. So one of the interesting things about drugs and pharma, and we'll get to vaccine, is that India had something called process patents. The West believed in product patents. So the advantage of this was there was a lot of innovation in process, in production of drugs and pharma, which gave India a competitive advantage in this issue. And that is what has allowed us to do process innovation and produce low cost drugs, including vaccines, and become kind of a provider of vaccines to the world. And where this proved to be very beneficial was during the pandemic, where vaccine diplomacy came into its own. So the fact that we had a comparative advantage, we had developed the technologies for process, and we had become cost competitive was an important factor in being able to do vaccine diplomacy. The second example is of digital public goods. As I said, you're going to be hearing a lot about it, so I'm giving you a little bit of a personal perspective, because as Hindol mentioned, you know, I have been in government in policy for 50 years, and you know, some of these experiences which I've had may be interesting. So you know, the unique ID was developed in papers which I did between 2002 and 6. And the interesting issue here is that the goal, oh shit, I'm sorry, I'm having this, I was afraid of this, 1 second. I have this nerve problem which is acting up. Sorry, I'll have to speak very slowly, so don't mind me, huh? And I can't smile, I'll just have to focus on the presentation. Huh? No problem. So the goal, the problem which I confronted was there were like 250 programs for the poor all over the country. So if you know about programs, they are implemented by the district collector. And it turned out that some people were not receiving any of these programs. So this is what we call type 1 and type 2 errors. So you had hundreds of programs. Some people were using multiple programs, but then many others were not receiving anything. So the concept that I developed was that if every person could have a unique ID and we could associate that and the program with it, then we could identify both people who were getting multiple programs and those who were getting none. So that was the origin of what then became UID, Aadhaar, and then it was taken by Nilekani from public to private, and then the UPI was developed. So you know, some of these things have a interesting history. That's what I wanted to you to convey. And since the UPI, we have developed various information and knowledge platforms and missing markets. That's a very important element, both of domestic public goods and of external public goods. That is something you will have to think about. Here we don't have that much time, but we can mention EGOM, which is a market which has been developed by government, and Skill India, which is another very important program that we have developed. With that, let me move on to the main part of my talk. It's working? Okay. Okay, so we moved the wrong way. Okay. So there's, as the title said, we are going to talk about Viksit Bharat, and there are 4 elements of this. One is, where are we today? So I'll say a little bit about per capita GDP, per capita growth, employment, poverty, and income distribution. From there, we look at the global opportunities. There are 3 very important elements, and this is the part I think you will find very interesting, and it has applications to many of the work which you're going to do and to other people. So demography is one, demonopolization of manufactured exports. You all heard of supply chains. That is the second one. And services unbundling. I may not have time to talk about this because I'll try to stick to 30 minutes. Then the third element is the domestic challenges which relate to all this. And in that there is quality of basic education and skilling. And of course something we have talked about for a long time, the legacy of bureaucratic socialism. And finally, a little bit on where we are going to go. So give you a view or a perspective on where we hope to be in 2050. So where do we stand? So we look at growth rate, employment and wages, poverty and distribution. So here is the first graph. These are the two graphs. One is our growth rate of India. The other is relative to China. The top one is India, and you can see that the trend has been a gradually rising growth rate. Relative to China, we have been closing the gap. It was negative, but has become positive in the last few years. That's the red line you see on the lower part of the graph. So that's so this when people are pessimistic or optimistic, this is the thing to keep in mind. It is not a new thing. It's been happening gradually over the last 30 years or so. So what it means is that it's possible for us to accelerate this process even further. I'll give you the numbers later, but let's look at the second graph, which is the growth of employment, man days and real wages. Again, if we look at the growth rate, there is a rising trend in both the employment and in the wage rates. The employment is the red line and the real wage is the blue line. Now this is basically ASI, which is part of the formal sector, mostly manufacturing and a few services. It doesn't capture all the services in the economy, but it gives you an idea of and a base for being optimistic. So what I'm trying to clear is this very negative views that some people are propagating that is not there in the data. That is short-term effects of the pandemic, and we have to ignore them when we are talking about the next 30 years perspective. As you noticed in the first graph, there is intense fluctuations in the growth rates, right? So what I have given here is the 5-year averages of per capita growth and GDP growth. And you can see that the growth rate, if you look at the second column, for example, the per capita growth rate in this certain period went down, then the next 5 years it went up, increased, then it went down, then it went up again. So the positive change and the negative change. So basically an idea of fluctuations. You have to be used to fluctuations. Anybody can just look at the downward part and say it's going down. So the message overall, the numbers don't matter so much, except that, for example, the average per capita GDP growth of 6.2% is possible for the rest of the decade. That's not a difficult thing given our history. And similarly, there is a GDP growth of 7% is feasible. That is what the graph which I told you earlier, and these numbers which have 5 and 10-year averages give you a picture of. Now look at the graph on the left. There's a lot of talk these days that employment is low, unemployment is high, wages are not going down. So I have given on the left, the graph gives you the ratio of the worker population ratio for employment, and you can see that both these are clearly on an uptrend. Now this what I have done is I have used a consistent data set called PLFS. Many people try to link different data sets, and there are intense controversies about that. So I have just taken one consistent data set, And it's not so much the particular numbers. You can see on the right, the numbers may be 3.7% average growth or 3.3. But the point I'm trying to make here is that the trend is clearly upwards. So the worker population ratio has been rising. This means that the number of jobs created has risen faster than the population growth. That's the key message here. The second point on the right side with the wage rates is an interesting fact. That is that there are basically three classes of workers: casual workers, self-employed, and salaried workers. Now, in a sense, self-employed are not really workers because they are working for themselves. They are kind of entrepreneurs, if you want, micro-entrepreneurs. But anyway, the interesting fact which is there in this table is that over the 6-year period, the highest growth in real wages has been with casual workers. The story which you see in the press is that there is lack of jobs, so people are being pushed down to become casual workers. The actual fact is that the real wage has been growing fastest in this category. There's an interesting associated fact with this, and this what I have done is for casual workers, I have plotted on the x-axis the worker population ratio and the right axis the real wage growth. And you can see over the 6-year period both have gone up. That's the red line. What does that mean? That means the demand for casual workers has grown faster than the supply. So employment is going up, wages is going up. Okay, so it is not trickle down, it's not cost push. It is coming, you could say it's the opposite. It is the opposite of trickle down because they are growing fastest. The second thing you notice is that the salaried workers, this is the last column on the second part of the thing, which says minus, oh sorry, that was in the graph, minus 0.4. So, so what is the problem here? And as I'll give you an indication, the problem here is in skills. The whole problem is the poor quality of education and skills, because that is what is critical to the wage rates of the salaried workers. Okay. Now we look at poverty. Again, you hear a lot about poverty these days. Say, oh, poverty is increasing. People are still poor. I think I don't want to mention the political leader. You know very well. He's in the US right now. He's making these sort of statements. They're just plain wrong. They are not supported by the data. So what does the data show you? There are different ways we internationally, I use all international definitions so not to get caught up in the unnecessary debates. So there is something used to be called the $1.1 poverty line, the $2 poverty line, and the $4 poverty line. This was like 50 years ago. Now these poverty lines keep getting upgraded as they shift the base, right? So if you see, it's not 1 right now, or the one when I did it, which is 1.9. The 2 has become 3.2, and very recently these have all been updated again. But that does not really matter what you call it, but the facts remain the same because it is the same $1, $2, $4 poverty line. So what does it show? So again, we use consistent data series, which are the NSS 2011-12 and the NSS 22-23. And as the first line shows, there has been a dramatic decline in poverty over this period from 12.2% to 2.3%. We call this the absolute poverty, okay? And the next, the $2 or now the $3.2 PPP has gone down even more dramatically from 53.6% to 21.8%. You still hear talk about that it's not just about the absolute poor, but those who are vulnerable. The fact which comes out from here is the vulnerable population has gone down from more than half to 1/5. Those are the ones which poverty, who are poor at 3.2 poverty line. Okay. Huge decline. The one, not just the poor population, but what used to be called the vulnerable population has also declined. Finally, at the bottom, if you see the Gini coefficient, that is a measure of distribution, that has declined. So those who say the distribution has gone worse, there is no factual basis for this. And the last one, where people talk about top X percent, bottom X percent, I have myself calculated these ratios, and both of those, the top to bottom, rural and urban, have declined. Okay. So I will skip over this next slide, but the picture I think you have got. So right, what I am saying is there is no need to worry about the state. Now that does not mean everything is hunky-dory. Please remember, we are still a low middle income country, and I'll talk about that, and it's also again relevant to the issues you are going to discuss. But I'll come back to the overall perspective. But what the key problem here, which I identify, I think it's enough for today, is I look into various aspects of education and skilling, and this is on skilling. So one of the things I identified is that the rural areas, the occupations which are having the highest growth, the real growth in rural wages are handicraft workers. This is an interesting fact. So what is happening is demand is being created, their skills are being upgraded, and their incomes are going up. That's one of the simplest key lessons of this. While those where whose occupational skills are no longer adequate to what is needed, they are the ones who are suffering the most. That is the point about this graph here. So the key point is skilling is the key to the future, job skills. Finally, I just wanted to mention before I go to my next topic, how I look at social indicators. Again, everybody, you'll hear different people, they have different views on how we are doing, with respect to South Asia or our peers. So what I do is, I plot every social indicator, in this case life expectancy, against the per capita GDP. Okay? So that is, the green dots are all the countries in the world. The black is you could say a regression line, which indicates what we should be at a minimum if we are at that income. The lower red dot is India on the left. So we are slightly below on life expectancy. So like that we can we can draw all social indicators and get a picture of where we are. Here we are underperforming. And then if you look at the next two dots, the blue and it's supposed to be pink, that is where we should be when we become an upper middle income country and a high income country. Okay? So that is kind of, you can think of as a target for us for the next 10 years and the next 25 years. Okay? So this way we can look at all the indicators and have a perspective on where we need to be. Okay, so the next section, I think I'm going too slow by the way, but I'm sorry. Yeah. So these are the most important things I'll see, because I'm not being able to speak too well today. But I want to, this is the most important part where I want to give you an idea. So the demographics, the supply chain de-risking. So demographics is going to be the big opportunity for us. Supply chain de-risking, which is happening in the world and which is very relevant to the issues you will be talking about also. E-services, I'll only say a bit about this, but this is happening very rapidly. And skilling for India, which I've also mentioned. The slogan I use is skill for India, skill for the world. So why is that? So the table on the right, the first two columns give you the change in the working age population in the last 30 years and the next 30 years. Now, if you look at the red means the working age share of that country has been declining. So, if you go down the list, you can see there were three countries which I mentioned here where the working age population was increasing: Indonesia, Mexico, Vietnam, and India. 3 plus 1, India. In the next 30 years, virtually every country, certainly the ones I have indicated there, their working age population share in the world will be falling, and India's, which is 0.2, which is the last line if you go in the second column, India is the only country in which it will be rising. This demographics change is going to be very, very important for India. Okay, this is our big opportunity. So, very simply put, in terms of averages, our comparative advantage will go from low skill labor intensive to medium skill labor intensive to high skill intensive. Now, you might say we already have very high skills, for example, in software, etc. But what I'm talking about is the average of the whole country, right? So, we have to first make sure the lower skills, the simple skills which you need for ordinary jobs, basically reading, writing, okay, being able to speak, being able to understand, and so on. The middle skills actually we have neglected. They are needed not just in manufacturing, but construction you can think of, plumbers, electricians. Those are what I call middle skills. So, this comparative advantage is going to shift, and we must be there to exploit it. Just to mention a few countries, the three categories you see high income, upper middle income. So, high income countries is where our big opportunity is. The upper middle are where our competition is in a way, and the lower is where Vietnam stands, because there is a lot of talk about Vietnam I'm mentioning, but Vietnam is a very small country where they are already running into labor shortages. So this is the perspective which underlines many things. So, for example, the upper countries, what we need to do is to exploit our comparative advantage with respect to them. We need FTAs with these countries. We already have FTAs with Japan, ROK, and we are in process with EU and UK. And why is this important? There are still some people. I attended a meeting yesterday organized by Mr. Shyam Saran. I don't know how many of you know him. He is a former foreign secretary. And though I could only attend, I'm sorry, this problem started about 3 days ago. I could only attend for the beginning. But you see that there's a feeling that China in East Asia is the big place, the fast growing economy, the big advantage. But what I assert is that that's completely wrong. And what I have given you here is some data. I'm sorry, I won't go through all of it, but there's data on outward FDI and manufactured imports. And I'll just read out some of the conclusions which follow. These 5 countries are the source of 60% of global FDI, which is 7 times that of China. They import 53% of the world's manufactured imports. That is where the demand is. That is where our exports will have to go, which is 5 times that of China. And similarly, if you just take Japan, UK, and Korea, they constitute as large a market for foreign manufactured goods as China. So, that set of countries is where our markets will be, that's where the FDI will come, and we have to make sure that happens. The second issue, again, I'll just go through quickly through these charts. The issue of globalization, deglobalization comes in. So, one of the difficult questions which we have to address, which hopefully you will also address, is that the ratio of trade, there is deglobalization in the following sense. If you look at the left-hand graph, the ratio of merchandise exports of the world to GDP has flattened out. Okay, in a period from around 98 to 2008, there were huge opportunities expanding. China exploited these. Now we are in a period where it is flat, okay? So it's not going to be easy, okay? It's going to be very difficult. And on the right, you see China not only exploited these opportunities to 2008, its share of merchandise exports is continuing to grow. China is different. They have an explicit program of monopolizing manufacturing. That pink graph now there is the share of world manufactured exports. They have kept increasing of China's exports, that is, okay? So that is the major threat which the world is now beginning to see. I have been talking about it for at least a decade. But you will see now, you read any international paper, read The Economist, you read the FT, you read Wall Street Journal, all of them are now waking up to the fact that China is different. It is not like every other country, okay? Think of it as China Inc. Almost think of it as one large company led by the communist leader. I'm oversimplifying to make the point in simple terms. And one example of that is this table on the left. It shows, when you go from the totals, which is 20%, you go to individual commodities. This is the 4-digit level. The highest share, China has 2/3 of the market for pottery, okay? 2 days ago, there's a news report that in northern India, northern Thailand, all the pottery manufacturers are being wiped out, okay? Then you go down to the red ones, the telecom, electronics, they have 40% of the market. Again, this is at the 4-digit level. If you go to 6 and 8-digit level, you drill down into it, again, something which you might look at here, is that these ratios go up hugely for many products, okay? So, so the basic problem, again, I would have loved to tell you about, perhaps I'll come some other day, that it's a social market economy. Its growth market model is what I call an illicit model, which is export-led, import substituting, investment driven. To understand why this is so, you have to understand the socialist market economy and then the S-read strategy. But bottom line, they have a goal to monopolize all critical areas of technology, okay, and manufacturing technology and manufacturing. So this is a real threat, and it is very important that India, in cooperation with the US and EU particularly, that's why I mentioned the FTA there, but there are many other issues in this, that we have to cooperate in meeting it. So what is the problem from India's perspective? This graph gives you the exports thing, but the fact is that India ranks 5th in manufactured goods production, but is only 15th rank in exports. You can see here again, of course, you have China and other countries, but I've also given India at the bottom. Okay, the pink, I think the pink line, right? Yes. So in very simple terms, this gap summarizes what is wrong with our achievements in manufacturing. 5th rank in production, only 15th in exports. So what is the problem? The problem is a quality gap, okay? As you all know, a very small share of our industry is formal, 15 to 20%. Most of it is informal. You can think of the formal in terms of supply chains. You know, we are talking now about international supply chains, entering international supply chains, but the informal has its own quality chain, which is very inferior, okay? That is the problem which we have. So we have to move more and more of this production from that low quality to the high quality. That is the challenge. That's the only way to do it. And we need help. How will we need help? We know from history, again, if you study the history of the Southeast Asia, around in the 1960s, our per capita GDP was almost identical to most of these countries. There were some which were higher. Now, all of them are like 3 to 5 to 10%, 10 times our per capita GDP. How did they do it? That is what I have tried to explain in this, and that is what we, in a sense, have to copy. Okay? Remember, the situation is very different. Growth of world trade is no longer rising like this, it's like this. So we have to attract these anchor investors. So let me just go through this in case you can read it. So HIDCs, the MNCs anchored supply chains are responsible for 60% of world trade. Okay? So world trade now does not happen one to one. It happens through these MNC supply chains. Majority of these are headquarters in US, EU, UK, Japan. Countries like Vietnam, Bangladesh have a competitive advantage over us. For example, if you look at the EU, they have an FTA with EU which give them 12.5% advantage. That means we pay 12.5% compared to them. This is huge, you know. And the thing which I have had, for 30 years, I have tried to explain to people that this FDI anchor investors bring skills, quality, timeliness. It's not just capital. You think of it as capital. No. One of the most important things is they already have the market. You don't have to go and develop the market. The market is automatic. So this is what they did. Korea attracted these MNCs in the 60s, Malaysia in the 70s, Thailand in the 80s. All of them grew faster than us during that period. I think I made the point. I can move on because there's a whole lot left. I'll just go quickly over it. So the challenge I've already mentioned, one challenge which is coming, let me mention one which I haven't. If we look at, you see that graph, that is a similar one which I told you, all the countries in the world have plotted their labor force participation rate against the per capita GDP. The red one is the total. Okay, and if you look at the blue dot at the bottom and compare it to the red line, our labor force participation rate overall is much lower than where it should be, right? You can see the red dot at the bottom and it's far from the line. The green one is the male labor force participation rate and the red dot above it. So our male labor force participation rate is much higher than where other, even much higher income countries. Okay, so where is the problem? The problem is in feeble labor force participation. So that is one weakness which we can turn into an opportunity. We must ensure that female labor force increases. And again, we don't have time, but there's a whole set of things which one has worked on to make this happen. Just give you a quick idea of quality, and then we should move on. I'm taking too long. I will just, so if you look at the numbers under primary, our primary education completion rate is now pretty satisfactory. You see the 95, 96, 99. If you look at literacy rate of youth, which is the next line, it's also not too bad, right? 94, 96, etc. The problem is in the last two lines. They are very similar, so you can just see some numbers. What it shows you is, this is in 27. We don't have data. I'm collecting the recent data. But this was an international study which showed that at the primary end, only 45% of the students had above minimum reading proficiency. That means you graduate 100 people from primary school and less than half of them can read. Okay? Quality. We have to improve the quality. I think I'll skip all the stuff on the right. And if you see similar things on the skilling, our skilling rates are much too low. That's the main point. All this data which I have collected shows that. And of course, this ease of doing business, bureaucratic socialism, I think you all heard of. There's a jungle of controls, a control mindsets, etc., which is a big challenge. Since 91 reforms, we have been trying to do it, but not, only partly successful. So these are the 4 challenges we need to address. So opportunities, challenges, and then where do we want to go or we can get. Now here there are a few definitions. I'm sorry, but I'll just tell you. So our goal is to become a high income, upper middle income country by 2030 and a high income country by 2050. Let me just define this, because before I give you the projections, because you'll read, every consultancy, everyone will give you a different projection. Recently, IMF said we cannot become a high income country for, 100 years, etc. So I want to define very carefully what I mean by these 2 terms. Okay? So just bear with me. So what I did was, I look at, the World Bank has a definition of these things which is based on some obscure number which is not publicly available in a way, okay, or is not generally available. It's called GNI, okay. When we look at data, we look at GDP, we look at current constant price. It's none of those, okay. So what I did was very simple. What I said was, which country has become an upper middle income country according to the World Bank definition recently, and then I said which country has become a high income country again recently according to the World Bank definition. So what do we find? In 2019, Indonesia went from being a lower middle income country to an upper middle income country, and Romania went from being a UMIC to a high income country. So I take the per capita GDP of these 2 countries at that time in constant prices, and then I say, okay, here are my Indian projections, also a per capita GDP in PPP in constant prices, and when I get to these, I will be an upper middle income country and a high income country. Okay? Very simple. It may be wrong, it may not be perfect, but it's very clear. So then I do these 3 projections. The higher one is, you can call optimistic. The middle is base, which I work with. I think you'll find that if government has any kind of projection, they have not given any publicly, but it will be a little above what I call the optimistic. The bottom one, and it's important for a particular reason, but that is, what I do is, I look at the IMF projections for India and the whole world for the next, they only give for about 5 years, 4 or 5 years. Then I take the OECD long-term projections, which they give for 60, 70, they have long-term projections for all OECD countries, okay. So I use their 2 numbers and put them together to get projections for every country for which this is available, okay. So when I compare with China, I'm using my 3 projections and then the China projection implicit in the IMF and the OECD, okay, or if I compare with any other country, right. So let's see. So the point here is that even the optimistic projection only requires a growth rate of 7%, right. So you can think of these as projections from 6 to 7% roughly, okay. So within this range, it is possible to become a upper middle income country by around 2030 and a high income country around 2050. As I said, the government's goal is 2047, so they will generally have to have a projection which is higher than my optimistic. So this is where India, I think, will be. I won't be around to see it, but here is the good part. So this is the base projection, not the optimistic one, okay? So let me just describe the graph. It's a very important graph. The green line is the projection for the EU, okay? The blue line is China. Red line is India, and then you have Japan, Germany, etc. at the bottom, okay? You see these blue, purple and other lines. Now what I do in this is I have an index called VIP, which basically tracks, which is I feel the best way of measure of economic power. So in this, USA is 1, so it's everything is measured relative to the USA, okay? So you can see on the left 1, in this projection China does not reach 1. That's the important point here, okay? The blue line, which bends, does not reach 1. So according to this projection, its economic power will not catch up with the USA by 2050. That's the first interesting result, okay? Secondly, the second result is India's economic power will exceed that of the EU before 2050. That is the red line crossing the green, okay? The third point is, if you come down here, you see the crossing with the blue line, the red line crossing the blue, that is Japan, okay? So within the next 3 years or so, India's economic power, or you can think of economy, will be higher or larger than Japan's. So we will overtake both Japan and Germany in the next 3 years or so to become the third largest country. And remember, this is the base forecast. Okay, so just to repeat, we are in a reasonably good position to become a high income country by 2050. There are new opportunities which we must grab: demographics, demonopolization of manufactured exports. I talked about supply chains. I did not talk about service unbundling, but perhaps in the questions we can do that. And these old challenges must be addressed. The legacy of bureaucratic socialism, which Hindol knows very well, I think we must have discussed also somewhere, and the quality of basic education and skilling. Thank you for being patient.
Thank you so much, sir, for this very engaging and a very, very well explained lecture. I'm sure it was really, intriguing for everyone, especially because a lot of students in the audience are students of international economics and statistics. So I'm sure people have questions. We open the floor to questions. We will be taking 2 to 3, I think.
Before you go into questions, just one small thing. I just want to thank first Dr. Virmani, of course, for this absolutely brilliant lecture. One of the organizations, I can say it now I'm no longer part of it, would really benefit from seeing this presentation is Invest India. Yeah. Many of the struggles of Invest India, right. And many of the issues that, I particularly loved it because, I spent 5 years discussing things like this every single day. One of the things too, I think, why Dr. Virmani's lecture was particularly brilliant was it shows us how much China's long shadow, so to speak, falls on us. I particularly am talking about that slide where it talks, we tend to think of China in terms of technology and so on and so forth. But at the baseline, as something as simple as pottery, right? And, India really must ask itself why, with all our great legacy of this kind of work for, hundreds, if not thousands of years, why we have not been able to, in any effective way capture any part of the global market. It's a great failure. And I think this is something to resolve. The other part which I thought was absolutely fascinating is really a sense that we are so indoctrinated to think about the West as the exemplar. That everything good, even today, we are constantly looking at the West. And yet, many of the West or large parts of the West are in deep crisis. And I think, Dr. Virmani's presentation really emphasized, where India is going, what our future could be if we all put our mind to it. And indeed, many of the countries we are used to looking at as examples, where they are going. I think that's very, very important for students to understand, because they're going to think about where their future is. I'm going to be an old man, by the way, by the time we become a higher in income country. But at least all of you will still be young, and you will benefit from this change. The GII colleagues of mine will now open this research project. I invite all of you to be part of it, and of course, questions.
Yeah, take a couple, that's fine, yeah. So his will take first, then Alon.
So really enjoyed your talk. And if I may pick up on what Hindol just said with a story. India produces the highest quality, lowest price medical devices and drugs in the world. We export everywhere in the world except China. I happen to sit on the board of India's largest medical devices company. 2/3 of our production is exported everywhere except China, even though we have a Chinese subsidiary. Why? The Chinese government says, we will not approve your products until you give us your full blueprints and your process diagram, number one. In 2018, the Chinese film that won the Oscar was called, I won't give you the Chinese title, Dying to Survive in English. It was about a group of people in China who had banded together to illegally import high-quality, low-cost drugs, cancer drugs from India. The Chinese are literally dying to get Indian drugs. But we have on both of these counts, you talked about pottery, 2/3. This is how they have cornered the market, by making it impossible for foreigners to sell in areas that they deem to be of strategic interest. Complete pure mercantilism. And why is it that the government of India has not raised this issue at all with the Chinese?
So thank you for explaining. I would have done all these things myself, but sorry. So let me tell you, I was, this is like 20 years ago, I was a member of the technical group set up to do FTAs, if I remember, both for Korea and China and one more country. In this issue came up, exactly the drug issue was there 20 years ago on our agenda. Why we can't do it? You explained it yourself, mercantilism, absolutely. So I hope everybody understood what you're saying. That's exactly it. It's tariffs, non-tariff barriers, it's stealing of technology. You know what that SREAD stands for? Spy, steal, reverse engineer, and develop. You remember I mentioned SREAD? I'm sorry I didn't have the to explain it to you. So it's the same thing with illicit. You mentioned mercantilism. The word I used, kind of semi-technical, is illicit, which is export-led and import substituting. In the history of the literature, there is no such thing. You cannot have both export-led and import substituting. And that's the thing about China. I mean, we can call it mercantilism, etc. They can do anything. The party can direct anything, okay? And that is the social market economy. Maybe some other time in some other department, when I don't have this head problem, I'll come and explain. It's worth actually looking at, because there are too many China scholars who still do not understand the Chinese economy, believe me.
Okay, we'll take 2 questions at a time. Please introduce yourself first and then ask your question.
Very good afternoon, sir. I am Manan. I'm a third-year student here at the Jindal School of Liberal Arts and Humanities, and I also intern with JII. Thank you very much for your extremely insightful lecture, sir. You mentioned about the skilling gap in India primarily, and the NEP does suggest a protocol for it, but it also does it in the similar institution pattern which existed. It does not provide a separate institution, and the teacher training programs, the pedagogy remains similar. So, how in that process do we work towards building the skill gap or cutting short the skill gap, primarily in tier 3, tier 4 cities and rural areas in the country?
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Avinash. I'm a law student. My question is regarding the migration of millionaires, the private migration. So, as we see, a lot of millionaires are leaving the country. So, what is the impact of their leaving to the country, and how we can incentivize them to retain them? Thank you.
Okay, let me. I joined the Niti in November 2022. Join meaning, we serve the PM appoints, and he was very busy. So eventually, when I got the time to see him, I talked about skilling. Okay, this is an interesting story. I'll just tell it. That's the only time I met him, by the way. So I'm not trying to impress you, uh, but it's very interesting. So for about uh, 10-15 minutes, I was giving him a lecture. You can say, of course, you don't lecture the PM. He invites you, you go and see whatever. I talked about various things, and then for 10 minutes, I was talking about skilling. Okay. And he patiently listened to me. And then, when you're with the PM and you're talking, you're looking, okay, is he tired of listening to you? Is he fed up? So at one point, his face indicated, okay, I've understood what you're saying. And so I stopped. So he gave me his whole story about how he had raised skilling in Gujarat, etc., what he had done. Very important problem, very difficult to solve. Okay, that's the point. So let me tell you what it is. So I've spent actually the last 2 years looking at this industry. They're really, and you'll find that there are two graphs in this thing. It's a very complex thing. So two dimensions. One is the skilling of the formal sector is very different from the skilling of the informal. And like I said, 15% only is formal. Okay? And what we are really talking about generally is about this 15%. That this lower part, what's the difference? Okay, you say formal and informal words. The thing is, in the formal sector, there is profit. There are people now skilling and placing people in that formal sector. There is nobody in the informal sector. So I have talked to NGOs and I've looked at government programs. So there's a huge challenge of connecting the people, the students who have to acquire the education and skills, the educators, universities like you, and the industry. So we have to build that market. I call it a market. You can call it an ecosystem. So they are missing markets. Again, I talk as an economist, I'm sorry. But what I have found is that there are gaps. Now, let me end that with a, so yes, the NEP recognizes it. It's a huge problem. One of the ITIs I went to was a private one. They have the skills, they have the setup to train blue collar workers, but they have 4 lines of workers. I forget exactly, it may be like a lathe worker, a drilling machine worker, or whatever, right? In 2 of them, they were full. In 2 of them, they had no students. Okay? Nobody's coming. There's a demand out there. Okay? Believe me, I've talked to small industry. There's a demand out there, but people are not coming. So there's a real difficult problem. You have to convince everybody. You have to get them together. But you get the picture, right? It's a challenge. It is something I'm not sure how many other people, but I'm working on. But believe me, it's not easy. But we have to do what we can. And part of it, of course, is training the trainers. So what happens is, I asked them, in one of the classes, there was a gentleman who was teaching. So I asked him, where did you come from? What did you do? He had been trained in that same institute. He became the trainer. And then he went to, there's a national skilling institute which has been set up, which does higher level training. So these pieces are being put together, but that system is not yet functional. That's basically the simple answer.
I'm going to request Kanak to quickly wrap this up. Because of all the
Only that
delays,
time, right.
we have to take Sir for lunch and, and not to, overburden him. We'll take one. My request is if we take one last question.
We'll take one more question.
There's a young lady
Please,
there,
please.
so maybe both of you can quickly couple your questions together.
Keep it short and to the point.
Hello, sir. My question was, what is your opinion on how the brain drain, specifically the skilled workers, and because we see it mostly from India, how any skilled workers of all professions, they go abroad. How do you think the brain drain is going to affect the future projections for India becoming a high-income country?
Hello, sir. If the India's like working age population is going to increase in the future, and if the US working age population is going to decline in future, then why India can't catch up with USA by 2050? Though we see that there is a decline in poverty, so does it mean that what India will not have its manufacturing industry improved and a more working age population will be dependent on agriculture?
Okay, so I missed that previous question on migration. Really, it is our laws and that bureaucratic part, as I said. We have very oppressive laws, very oppressive implementation. It is a legacy of socialism. We have been struggling. I'm sure Hindol will tell you a lot. He worked on in West India what we've tried to do. On skills, I have two slogans. One I call skills and jobs are two sides of the same coin. And the other is that I think I mentioned skill for India, skill for the world. There is absolutely no reason. In fact, skilling for the world actually will attract. There is economic research showing that when people, sorry. There's actually a research paper which tried to see the effect of migration on the home country. And what they found was that if there are skills which are needed, I'll just take an example like nursing. And this was a specific study in a specific country. So when there is an opportunity for nurses to migrate, a lot of nursing colleges came up, or the equivalent in that country. So many people applied and got trained in nursing that the person who left was a small proportion of the total which were trained. So the excess trained people then benefited the country. You got the point? You just have to have the institutions there, you have to have the incentives, and you have to correct them. Then people rush into it, right? In the hope of a job which gives them, let's say, $1,000, but many of them will not be able to go there, and then they end up working in India for a $100 job. But it's good for the country. Remember what I said, that there were 4 blue-collar lines. Nobody was applying for these. The thing is that this kind of stuff acts as a signal. If there is a global demand, you then make the effort and spend the money to acquire those skills, and they will be useful for India. So I don't think it is a substitute. It is not going to subtract from it. There was some there's some last question connected.
Sir, my question was if India's working age population is increasing and if USA's working age population is decreasing, then why can't India catch up its economic power by 2050?
So remember, So this is something to do with growth theory. Let me just give you a very little bit. There's a technology frontier. Okay, India is out here. We are a lower middle income country. The most developed countries are here. So the further you are from the frontier, the faster you grow. But as you get closer to it, you slow down, okay? So one of the key challenges, there are two challenges. One is to accelerate your growth. If you are stuck in a kind of trap, there's acceleration we have successfully done, right? We moved up. I showed you that graph. We have gradually raised the growth rate. But now the challenge for the next 25 is, of course, we can grow at 7% in the next 5 years. That is my forecast. But the challenge is to sustain that growth over 25 years. That is not easy. There is only one country in the world which has grown at 9% or thereabouts for 30 years. Can you guess which that is? China. Yeah? All the others are way behind. The next are like, they grew for 20 years at, let's say, 7%. Okay? So to think, I mean, the question is why? Remember where we are. Remember that graph with rising red line? We are still down here. This is one of the dangers which I warn about, that there are two kinds of people in India. Some people who think we are still down here at this end of that red line. Remember that red line? It goes from here up here. They think we can't do anything. Wrong. There are some people who see the red line up here and say we are going to be there, and they think they're already there. That's the danger, big danger. What you have to make sure is sustain that high growth from where we are and do it for the next 10, 15, 20 years.
Fantastic. We must conclude at this point, and we must let's go. It's been a long journey for him. Thank you very much, Dr. Virmani. We are so thankful that you took the trouble to come all the way. Very, very grateful for a wonderful lecture. A round of applause, please, for Dr. Virmani.